It's estimated that about 15% of the population was traumatized as a kid. Depends how you classify trauma. But most of those people don't know they have it. People do notice they have symptoms. They're probably working on it. They're talking about it. They're trying to get better. But most people with CPTSD are just suffering with it. They're trying to get better, but they're not. Now, you might be someone who's lived your whole life afraid that you're going to become one of those people, stuck in trauma, never being happy or loved or fulfilled or financially stable. And that is in fact a risk that comes with CPTSD, especially if you don't find anything that helps you. And I get it. It's hard to know when you're first starting out on your healing what is going to help you. But if you give up and you don't try, you're even more at risk to get stuck. Or maybe you've tried some approaches to healing from trauma, but you kind of only, did it halfway, or you have known what steps would help you and change your life, but you haven't found the power inside to keep moving forward. And I want to talk about this today to encourage you to take your healing seriously, to double down on it so that you can heal. And I'm going to lay out 10 things that you can do. And if you're ready to move forward with that right now, obviously, not all of them are going to apply to you. But these are 10 things that help me and that I teach to all the people in my coaching programs. When you've heard everything that I'm going to lay out in this video, you can pick one or two action items that are most important to you, and you can start implementing them today. And I would encourage you to take the ones that, like if you didn't heal them, would actually cause you the most pain based on what's caused pain in the past. And of those, also ask yourself, what's actually fixable for you right now? So something that's important to you and something that can be fixed. And that will give you like a little win fairly quickly in the healing process. And that is definitely helpful when you're sitting there looking at a whole bunch of things you think that maybe you should change about your life. Get something that's important and fixable so that you have that feeling of like, there, one down. And that is shown to be very helpful to people who are trying to stick with a process. Healing from trauma requires some persistence. Okay, so here are the 10 things. Number 1, learn what complex PTSD is, not just what you've heard on the internet, not just what other people say about it, and not focusing all your energy on what might be the diagnosis of other people who are in your story. That's not the same thing as understanding what's going on with your brain and learning about your brain and about brain dysregulation and what that does to you, and about emotional dysregulation and re-regulation and what a difference that can make. How does that impact your life? We didn't know until very recently that CPTSD is an injury to your brain and nervous system. And a lot of therapists and clinical professionals still don't know this. It's really important that you educate yourself so that you can choose professional help well based on people who get it, and so that you can make decisions on your healing that's, based on current knowledge and not old ideas. Number 2, when you look at yourself and how you're doing with your healing process, be willing to notice some of the problems that maybe have nothing to do with trauma. Now, it's true, CPTSD can make it hard to focus. It can make it hard to be consistent, to be as kind and considerate as you want to be. And it might make it hard to stay present. CPTSD might almost certainly has damaged relationships in your life. It might have damaged your health as well. Okay, so all those things are trauma related, but everybody has a couple of problems that are just kind of ordinary human problems. So it could be something like, maybe you're often late. A lot of people struggle with that. You don't have to be traumatized to be somebody who's chronically late. Trauma could be implicated, but sometimes that's one of the things that you just have, It's just something you're doing right now. And the reason I love the problems that are just normal person problems is because they're a little easier to solve. You don't have to heal your brain necessarily to get that going. It could be that you need to keep your kitchen cleaner, that the whole kitchen smells like garbage all the time, and when people come over, you're ashamed. And I know how trauma can drive that kind of procrastination, but it's a solvable problem. And I love low-hanging fruit problems, things that you can solve quickly and get another little win. A little win, you start feeling confident that you can take on another project for healing. Okay. Number 3, prepare to move your stories about the abuse and neglect that happened to you out of present time looping thoughts and into what I call the memory bucket. If you can imagine, there's a bucket, there's your present time thinking, and there is a memory bucket. So there's everything going on in your mind now. CPTSD can trap your emotional and body reactions from old traumatic experiences and then keep them looping in your mind as if they're happening right now. That's why it's so hard to have CPTSD. It's a different thing than a memory. It's activating all your adrenaline, your cortisol, it speeds your heart rate, it scatters your thoughts and puts your whole body in a state of stress. So it makes it really hard to stop thinking about it or reacting to it. That's what I call looping, or I call it an electric thought. It's very charged. What you want is to have access to your thoughts and memories, but not to be controlled by them, not to, get physiologically changed every time they pop into your awareness. An ordinary memory has the trauma element deactivated. It's not electric. It's unplugged. You can remember it, and if anybody asks you a question about it, you can remember all the same details about it, but it doesn't trigger this huge physiological and neurological response in you. If you had trauma, you probably have some looping electric thoughts that give you very charged reactions, and you probably have some memories that are not charged. So when I say get ready, one thing that will help you is to become open to the idea that you don't always have to be reactive toward the past. I teach a method to calm reactions. There are others out there. My method is called the daily practice. And if you watch this channel, you hear me talk about it like a lot. And I point you toward the description section under every video. That's where you can find it. It's a free course. It takes less than an hour to learn it and try it. And you can give it a try and see if, like me, it helps you take those looping thoughts and just kind of calm them down. Sometimes naming those stress thoughts and releasing them really does make a difference. So, good thing to try. Now, I'm going to keep teaching you under the assumption that you've tried these techniques, but if you haven't, just try to hear the essence of what I'm saying here. If you feel anxious at the thought of surrendering your fear and resentment through these exercises, and some people do because fear and resentment, for a lot of us, it's a primitive form of a boundary. Like being anxious and worried or angry can feel like the only protection we've got. Like, no way, you're not getting in. If that's you, I would just say, do it a tiny bit at a time, do a little bit at a time and see what happens, and just see when you do surrender fear about something, do you end up incapacitated? Or does it make you a doormat? Or does it make you feel like a little more lighter-hearted? If you're feeling more lighthearted, you're doing it right. It's not been my experience that facing what's bothering you and writing it down amplifies it or makes it worse. In fact, it makes me feel freer of it and more empowered. It makes me more clear about when something dangerous is in my presence and when I need to act on something. So you can try that. Just try that. You don't have to believe me. You try. Number 4 is stop trying to make other people not trigger you. All right? So if you get very triggered by people, and pretty much everyone with complex PTSD gets triggered by people. That's what makes connection hard for us, in fact. And that's what makes us have a tendency to want to isolate or keep people at arm's length, because those interactions can be so triggering. So there's a misunderstanding that if we could just get other people to stop behaving the way they do, or saying what they say, or making us feel the way we feel, then we would be okay. And sometimes, occasionally, that's true, but it's usually not true. Because even if they wanted with all their hearts to stop triggering you, they probably wouldn't succeed. The trigger is in here. It's, somewhere in here. It's for you to work on. And anyway, most people are not willing to try to change everything for you. That's just reality. So you learning how to calm your triggers is going to be more effective, easier, and more empowering for you than trying to make the world around you change so that it doesn't trouble you. Now, when you can learn to calm your triggers, you become more perceptive, and you can begin to tell if someone in your presence is actually a difficult person, or if you're just feeling triggered and having difficulty, but they're not causing that difficulty. That's hard to tell sometimes, right? Surely you struggle. Sometimes I do. Is it just me? Is it them? Am I being crazy? Am I being a doormat? And in most cases, you're confused about that question because you have triggers. So learning to know the difference is called discernment. And discernment is one of the biggest things that we lose with CPTSD. The ability to tell the difference between, am I generating this drama, or is something actually being done to me? It's so difficult to go through life when you're not clear about that. That is a consequence for some of us of how we were raised, feeling really scared and upset and being like, I'm scared, there's all this fighting in the house, and go, no, there's nothing going on, shut up, go to bed. right? So you start second guessing yourself and it turns into maybe a developmental delay, where you just have a little trouble like making sense of reality. So using the writing technique I'm telling you in the daily practice can be a really good way to start strengthening your discernment. You could also do that with a therapist. You could do that with friends. You could do that in a 12-step fellowship. It's really important, though, to have a way to face what's intense for you and to get some support while you figure out what is reality. There's no substitute for other people for that. And what a relief when you get a strong feeling that someone you meet doesn't belong in your life, or something they did was a deal breaker for you, versus when someone is a person you want in your life and you can see your triggers for what they are. You can work to make your relationship better. You can become more trustworthy. You can be a better friend to them by calming your triggers. What you open up for yourself with those calm triggers is choice. It's not going to make you like a perfectly nice person who puts up with anything. It's not going to make you mean. It just gives you choices about how you want to respond because you can perceive things better. So the other great thing about learning to calm your triggers is that you become flexible. You become able to hang out with a variety of different people, and you can be in all kinds of circumstances. You don't have to be so particular and have, so-called boundaries about, I don't do this, I don't let people say that. You can start to be flexible and just let people be themselves and let life happen around you. You are safe to relax around people when you know that when you need a boundary and you need to step back from someone, you can. And when you know your boundaries and you're prepared to honor them, you can be less afraid to connect with people and instead be more open to them. So all the bad things that come with CPTSD, problems with relationships, focusing, balancing your emotions, stress levels, all that gets less activated if you don't get triggered. So there's your superpower. If you were to do one thing, learn to notice when you're triggered and bring it down. Now, learning to notice dysregulation and a triggered state in yourself, that's a huge piece of what I teach in my coaching programs and my courses. Dysregulation triggers disconnection from people, and that in turn triggers self-defeating behavior. And when healing begins in those areas, good parts of you have room to come shining through. Your kindness, your competence, your talents, your joy, all of this has space to take root in your life and bear fruit. The good things in you, that's what gets suppressed by all the trauma. And it gets locked down when your reaction to hurt and trauma is to start to control the environment. Some people go through life suppressed, for years, but only because they were too dysregulated to manage stepping out of their safe zone. In the safe zone, you can't afford to connect with people or face your mistakes, right? But when you learn to calm triggers and re-regulate your emotions and your brain, you can take some risks and your life grows. Now remember, this is not just to feel better. You do have to feel better. You do need that. You deserve that. And what it gives you is an opening for the real healing to begin. And that's you becoming yourself and delivering the love and the contribution that you have to bring to the world. All right, number 5, stop trash talking the people who you choose to have in your life. It's very common for people who don't have CPTSD to just throw labels on people. This person's a narcissist, they're toxic, they're worthless. But if you really want to heal, if you want to double down on your healing, I encourage you to stop using those labels on people and instead just start noticing whatever you call it, the thing that other people do or have that is so troubling for you. The thing to focus on is not the other person, but the way that you get tense or you struggle around them. The way that your emotions rise up or you get dysregulated. That's the part. That's the part where you actually have influence over what happens next. You do have a right to make decisions about whether to let someone into your life or not. So now when you're triggered by someone, instead of just telling them, hey, you're a narcissist, and therefore, you should read this book I found about narcissists, because that always goes over well, right? No, it doesn't. Well, you can either accept them or you can step away from the relationship. The more you recover, the more you'll be at peace with the people you want in your life. And the more quickly you'll be willing to withdraw from people who you don't want in your life. Focusing on yourself is always going to be your superpower. When you can notice, oh, here we go, this is where I get triggered. Now, this doesn't mean that you should just learn to put up with terrible behavior in other people. You want to be aware, you want to be grounded, lucid, clear-headed, clear-eyed, and perceptive so that you can make good decisions about how to proceed when somebody begins to treat you badly. And if somebody's treating you really well, of course, you want to be at your best. So you want to be able to open your heart and enjoy that relationship when it's a good thing to do. Number 6, stop clinging to bad relationships that make you miserable. Now, I have to bring this in any discussion of what it means to double down on your healing. Staying in bad relationships and hemorrhaging all your energy and your cognition to a situation where you're fighting all the time, or you're being treated in an abusive manner, or you're being gravely disrespected, or you're sad all the time, this will halt your healing. Now, I understand there are relationships where there's an obligation or a duty, as there is with, dependent children or with certain other people who rely on you for care. And that may require extra effort and extra support to remove yourself from those situations that are destroying your happiness and your chances of healing trauma. But whether it's simple or complicated for you to get that distance, it's important to keep moving forward. All right, number 7, it's the same thing, but for jobs. Don't stay in jobs that make you miserable unless your life depends on it. There are times when we all have to do what we have to do to get a paycheck, but not forever. Don't let that be forever. And if the paycheck is not the problem right now, I want you to ask yourself, is being miserable at work something you are unconsciously choosing so that you can avoid facing something else that's hard for you right now? And I talk about this very directly because it's something that I've had to face in myself too. There was a lot of time when I was still at the effect of CPTSD where if I weren't miserable, I would have to notice immediately that there was this giant hole in my life where close relationships were supposed to be. And instead I had superficial relationships and I hated my job. And I was getting my self-esteem off the fact that I had this job, but I wasn't happy and I didn't like the way I was being treated. And I stayed 10 years working for an awful boss. But because I didn't have to stay in that job, I know the problem was in here. The problem was that I was accepting this unhappy lot in life in exchange for not having to make changes that felt impossible for me back then. And this was when I was a single mom. And I think I could have, I was probably scared to leave the security of that job, except that one day when the recession of 2008 got rolling, you know what? I didn't have a job anymore anyway. But honestly, I'm so glad everything fell through because it was then that I started my first business, really because, nobody else would hire me. I had to do something for money. I got my business off the ground. And that ended up being a really happy way to earn a living for many years until I transitioned to doing this, to becoming Crappy Childhood Fairy. And for those of you who have other extenuating circumstances that are keeping you stuck, feel the truth of what I'm saying. Let it guide you. Don't let yourself give up on your healing. Trying doesn't always lead to success, but success favors people who try. All right, number 8, detach from the belief that you passively, just magically, attract bad people. Now, I hear people say this all the time. I attract narcissists. Well, acknowledge that the issue is not really who is attracted to you. The issue is, who are you attracted to? Who do you tolerate? Who do you date? Who do you sleep with? That is the problem. And that's a much better problem to have than some sort of magic occurrence that flies out of the sky. Oh, look, a narcissist has just landed and attached themselves to me. It can't happen without your cooperation. It may seem like they just occur. Think of those signs in the park. It says ticks occur. Narcissists occur. But you do not have to let them into your life. Occasionally, exploitative people do look for vulnerable people and target them, but most of the problems in your life are more likely to be caused by a lack of boundaries on your part, a lack of a red flag detector, and being able to see, who should I let into my life? It's your red flag detector that needs to be switched into the on position, and that's part of trauma healing too. If you're going to double down on your healing, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to take responsibility that you are the gatekeeper. And you may have heard me say, I attract mosquitoes, but, I don't marry them. Or sometimes I say, I don't sleep with them. I think that would be a good t-shirt. But see, attracting them is not really the problem. Number 9, if you have addictive behaviors, make recovery your first priority. Alcohol, drugs, food, pornography, spending, all that stuff. Your healing will get an enormous boost if you can take care of that. When you allow yourself to experience life's ups and downs and show up for it and not escape by some means, and I think we should include limerence in that, you know, just checking out into fantasy, right? When you can stay in your life, then you can start to solve your problems. I know how tempting it is to try to grab on and control things or run away from them or just get into some kind of oblivion, some comfort. And it's almost universal with people with CPTSD, the urge to fly away or crawl into a hole. It's going to take one form or the other. It's going to visit you sometimes, but if you're using anything at all to sort of genuinely escape, like drugs, it's going to delay your ability to cope with feelings of disappointment and stress and emptiness and loneliness. Those are feelings that we actually need to have sometimes because they guide us into action. I totally know what it's like. But if you're using something to escape, it will make healing almost impossible. And even when you're perfectly healed, life is going to have its ups and downs, so there's always something to face. You're going to lose friends. Big disappointments will happen. Outside events will happen. You're going to need a means to be able to handle what comes. Whatever approach to healing that you choose for yourself, you're going to need an easy way to self-comfort and bring yourself back out of dysregulation and into re-regulation. And if you want to learn how to do it, I can teach you. That's all in the links in the description section below this video and all my videos, if that's something that interests you. When you always have a way to calm your reactions and comfort yourself, you'll find it's a lot easier to overcome addictions. That is true freedom, when you feel like, I don't know what's going to happen, but whatever it is, I'll be able to face it. All right, number 10, sit down and ask yourself, this is just a thought exercise, and I really like this one. Ask yourself, if I really had to solve this problem of having CPTSD, what are 10 things I could do? And I love doing this. You can apply it to any kind of problem, but it's a really good one to do about how you would heal from your trauma, because you actually have the answers. You do. You have the answers in there. You just haven't tapped them yet. Or you may not have had the energy to focus on, taking action on them right now. So make a list of them, the 10 things that if you really had to solve this problem, in a short period of time, what would you do? You don't have to act on all of them at once. They can be preposterous, but write it. Just bring them into the sunlight of your awareness, the actions you could take if you really wanted to. Let them into your mind and heart and just see what happens. Studies show that people with a lot of clutter around their homes have a higher than average rate of anxiety, depression, social isolation, and ADHD-like symptoms. But here's what bugs me about these studies. They assume that all these symptoms are caused by clutter, and therefore, if you clean up the clutter, you won't be depressed and stuck anymore. You'll be happier, more focused, more connected to other people. And honestly, there's some truth to this. But that doesn't mean that clutter is the main cause of those problems. I'm going to put a bold hypothesis out here, and that's that clutter is just one more symptom of trauma alongside depression, anxiety, isolation, and so on. But it's not the direct cause of those symptoms. Now, we know that trauma affects people neurologically, and that means your brain, your physiology, your feelings, and your behavior patterns. Now, trauma can make people compulsive. It can fill your thinking with stressful thoughts. It can make you feel immobilized and unproductive. It does something to your neurology that is quite often expressed as cluttering behaviors, accumulating stuff that you don't need and piling it up around your living space or working space, intending to get organized at some point in the future, but not having the inner power to do that. And I think cluttering behavior is a trauma-driven version of something normal and natural that we call nesting behavior. And nesting, that's setting up your home space, making it comfortable and warm and orderly and well-stocked, which is a good and natural instinct. But like all good instincts, trauma can push this one over the line into something over the top. And that's what cluttering is, that good instinct at an amplified level that makes it not good, that is caused by and causes a feeling of overwhelm and inability to get organized or to take action by cleaning up your stuff. So you have too much food and some of it is rotting, or too many jackets or giant stacks of papers you've been meaning to go through, or you can't find your toolbox because you left it lying around and then other stuff got piled up on top of it. that kind of thing. So that's what I mean when I say I have my own hypothesis, and it kind of goes against the research. Because while researchers assume that the symptoms that go along with clutter are the cause of clutter, I believe that clutter is more like a fellow symptom. Trauma causes all of them: depression, anxiety, lack of mental focus, and clutter. Does that feel true to you? Well, wherever it comes from. I think these symptoms interact with each other, and that's why when you're healing trauma, I don't believe that you have to always start with the root cause of the trauma. You can start anywhere in your symptoms where you feel enough inner power to take some action. So are you ready to throw out the old vegetables in the fridge and clean out those icky drawers? That's a great place to start. Do you have a couple of hours available to organize all your unsorted papers into separate stacks of, trash, file, and do something about? That's also a great idea. And you know what? Both of those actions would almost certainly lift your mood and improve your ability to focus. Decluttering is a powerful re-regulation exercise with very good fringe benefits of, like, your bills get paid. But in my experience, you're always going to need to be healing your dysregulation symptoms to even find that inner power to do any decluttering at all. Because that's the problem, right? You know you should declutter, but you have a lack of power to do it. Not doing it makes all the other problems in your life a little worse. Now, hoarding is like a separate thing, and it's harder to change, and I'm not really talking about that here today, but in that one, it's not only is there a lack of power, but there can also be a distortion in the thinking that it needs to be done. It just seems like, no, everything as it is terribly important. So I'm distinguishing clutter as like, no, you agree it's a problem. I wish I didn't have all this stuff piled up. I can't find my keys. So you agree it's a problem. It's a lack of power. So getting that inner power moving and accessing it, that's how you're going to be able to declutter. And with that power moving, activated in you, you'll also find that your emotions get lighter, your mind is more focused, you feel calmer, and you feel more open to new experiences and letting people into your life. I mean, have you ever had that? It kind of goes together. Clutter is a huge problem for a lot of people who had childhood trauma. And it's not just the physical space and belongings that could be called clutter, right? People with CPTSD also experience mental clutter. Too much on your mind, all in a jumble. Can't focus or read situations because it's like the bag of cats in there. And then there's emotional clutter where your feelings are popping up everywhere, some of them from so long ago you don't even know where they're coming from, but you have a debilitating reaction to them that's totally getting in your way. And there's also relationship clutter where the people are in your life, they're a mix of people who are good to have in your life and people who maybe should not be in your life anymore. And finally, there's time clutter, where you're overbooked, you're not prioritizing, you're getting swept away in things that feel urgent and ignoring things that are actually important. And I'm going to talk about all of these because they're all common with childhood PTSD, and they can all improve when you have the power to change even one of them. When you learn to detect and heal neurological dysregulation that's caused by trauma, this in turn causes so many other trauma symptoms, including the ones that trigger your tendency to stay cluttered, whether it's your calendar, your file cabinet, the floor of your car, whatever. Having space and order. I mean, doesn't that sound good? When you can practice noticing your neurological dysregulation, which is a common trauma symptom, and learning to master re-regulation, the clutter of all kinds starts to settle down. And there's a wonderful feeling of peace and possibility that can come into your life. And that's another source where that well, where your inner power comes from, it begins to fill up because there's peace, there's visual space around you, and there's time. So let's start with physical clutter. And I'm talking about belongings just strewn around your physical space, in your house, in your yard, in your car, in the place where you work. And it's visually chaotic. It's full of things that you don't actually use or need, and that makes it hard to find what you do need. Like, do you keep huge boxes or racks of multiple sizes of clothes in case you lose weight or gain weight, even though the clothes that don't fit now are old and out of style? And do the clothes that fit you right now have a good place to live in a closet with enough hangers or enough drawer space where clothes are clean and ready to wear, right? Am I nailing you about something? This multiple sizes of clothes is totally a thing with people who struggle with their weight. That you never really know, like what size, sometimes it'll come down for a while, it goes back up. And that's one of the beautiful things when order comes into your life around food, and it can be a long time coming. This is a thing that goes along with trauma quite a lot, like sort of clutter of the food, clutter of what you choose to eat and what you have available to yourself. But then that has this effect on clothes. And it can mean lots of boxes and cramming in closets, and then a weird whole segments of your closet that are sort of shame portions, clothes you can't get into. And what you can do with clothes that don't fit right now is you can put them away. It's okay to put them away, but put them in a way in a stored fashion and not just piled up everywhere and trying to figure it out. And every time you try something that's the wrong size, you feel bad about yourself. Like, why do that to yourself? Do you pick things up at thrift stores or left on the street? Like where I live in Berkeley, that's customary. Like even in fancy neighborhoods, when people have something that still has use, they put it out on the street. And so yesterday, or the day before, I was taking a walk and somebody had put out a bunch of, they put out like a plastic thing with different silverware. There must have been 30 knives, 30 forks, like the whole thing. And actually a year ago, we were really short. We have a lot of big potlucks and things, and we were short on having enough silverware. And so I bought some. I got some at Costco. It was cheap. We have abundant silverware, but it's like this leftover feeling like we don't have enough. I picked it up off the street and I'm holding it because I have adult sons, right? And I'm like, well, maybe as they go out on their own, they're going to need silverware. I don't know. But my husband's like, you did it again. You did it again. I grew up very poor and we often didn't have enough. And it's really hard for me to walk past stuff that's on the street being given away for free without thinking, I don't need this right now, but I could. And what if I did? And I should have this now. And then it becomes clutter. And so I'm lucky that I have this giant garage that I can put stuff that I don't really use in, but every year or 6 months I have to go in there and start putting stuff back out on the street. And it's almost like a funny thing in my family. It's a tendency I have that's definitely a legacy of some trauma from when I was little. So it's actually like a healthy, nice feeling for me when I gather up stuff and I do put it back out on the street. Like it makes me feel good that somebody else is going to use it. It always gets taken again by some other poor sap who has this thing that I have. I don't know, I might need 100 pieces of silverware in the future. Or it can also be nice to donate stuff. You can donate it to Goodwill. And if the stuff is decent, you get to add up the math with fair market value, and that's a tax deduction if you itemize your taxes. So one thing that holds people up is the feeling that these things could be sold. So, we have some broken bikes in the garage and we think, oh, well, we should sell them. If we fixed them up, they would be worth X and it would cost this much to fix them, and nobody ever fixes them. That's what it is. So if you are in a situation where you have the power to sell things, I know people with really bustling businesses on Craigslist or eBay, selling things, and maybe they go around and they actually collect stuff productively and sell them and make some money that way. Well, that's lovely. If you're not somebody who has the level of organization and power to do that, it would be better to give away the broken bike or to donate it. And so a rule of thumb is it just depends on how much money you have, but let's say that you could replace something for $20 and you're not using it right now, go ahead and give it away, because if you can replace it for $20, if you have a little more money, you could put the line at $50. If you could replace this thing for $50, but you're not using it right now, go ahead. So a bike is more than that, right? A used bike is, $500 or something. That's a lot of money. So then it's time to use a productivity method to write down some things you're actually going to deal with and give yourself a timeline. You go, I'm going to get this bike repaired. And the bike repair costs $60, and then you put it on Craigslist and sell it for a few $100s. And then you have the money, and that's satisfying, and I would like everybody to have that money. Everybody's happy, somebody has a bike and the bike is fixed and everything's going really well. But it's just realistically, can you do that? So another arrangement you can do is to partner up with somebody who is willing to help you, and you split the proceeds from these endeavors. And sometimes people who, they're looking for a little extra work, they would be happy to do this with you, but you still have to put the effort out to make that arrangement with them. So I'm just saying, sometimes the best way to get rid of the clutter is to give it away. It's still going to be valued by somebody. It's still going to be useful in the world. It's just that you're not going to have the cash. All right, so another thing, is your cupboard full of cans and containers of things that have been sitting there for more than a year? So cans do last a while. I understand. I was hungry a lot when I was growing up. We had times when we really did have nothing to eat. And so it's just been this tendency that started when I first started having my own money and my own place to live. I would way overbuy food. And it was stuff I was never going to eat. But I loved the feeling of cupboards that were completely full and had stacks of things. Like that gave me this feeling of peace and security. But the fact of the matter is right now, I don't need to have all that food in the cupboard because I have some money in savings and I could go buy it at the store at any time. Now, if hard times befell me, like at the beginning of lockdown, when we all thought, oh my gosh, there's going to be these food shortages, we're all going to starve. We were thinking, we're like, well, we live near a creek, we'll have water. And then I bought like cases and cases of tuna and chicken and green beans and corn and all this stuff that, we've barely made a dent in 3 years later. And it's time for me to give some of it to the food pantry because it's good food and people will be glad to have it, but we just need to distribute it where it's actually needed and going to get eaten. Even cans have their sort of sell-by dates, right? So that's something I'm actually really looking forward to. And I'll have more shelf space, and even if the shelves sit empty, that's fine. I personally, because I get so dysregulated by visual clutter, like seeing a shelf that has a little space between items, is actually very re-regulating for me and stimulates my imagination and my sense of being productive. It does. Do you have that? Do you have cars that don't work? God forbid. Are they on the front yard? Well, I grew up like that. And I was really embarrassed and ashamed about it. And it was just, my parents were going through a lot. They did not have power to deal with it. But yes, there was a broken car in the front yard for years. There was a wall between the living room and the garage that had been broken through, these bricks with a big jagged hole in it that was also there for years, and that we used that for a doorway, turned the garage into a bedroom. But as a teenager, it took me a while to understand what was going on in my family was alcoholism. Alcoholism just sucks away all that tidying energy, and this clutter was everywhere in the house. There were thick layers of dust, there was rotten food, and it made me really ashamed for people to come home. And so my husband had a car that didn't work. He went ahead and bought another one thinking he'd sell the old one, and then 2 years passed or more. Eventually he sold the car. So good news, he eventually sold the car, but it got covered with leaves. The neighbors began to complain. The city came and was putting tags on the car. And it was really this huge source of old shame. Well, there was I think some of it was legitimate present day shame, but this old childhood thing about being like the most screwed up family on the block. And the neighbors themselves were complaining. It was, it was beyond even my standards. And that level of clutter to me, it made it feel like we also were counting on having the money from that car, and we had a plan for that money, and we couldn't go forward with the plan for the money because we didn't have the money because we had this car, and we kept paying registration on it. And that kind of thing was very demoralizing to me. A lot of my healing from complex PTSD has to do with getting competency and mastery over managing life in these areas that were not totally together when I was a kid. Like I always have car insurance. I always see the dentist every 6 months. Even when I was a single mom and it had to go on my 3rd credit card, I took my kids to the dentist all the time. When I was a kid, I had very rotten teeth. And finally, a relative stepped in and paid for me to have like huge amounts of dental work when I was like 8. I had to have like 4 crowns by the time I was 8 because nobody was brushing my teeth, And so that's a thing that's always helped me feel like life is okay, life is together. Now, a car is a great example of something that's hard. Sometimes decluttering has this series of steps. And when you have CPTSD and you're having trouble holding your focus, and a task involves a whole series of steps, right? That can be very hard for a person with CPTSD. And this is where having a whiteboard or a digital online, like I use this thing called Kanban flow. I'm always telling people Kanban, and I make a list that I look at every day multiple times, and I delete things that I complete or move them into a done column. But you can create a little task and then click and drag it to these different columns and name them what you want. You can color code them. And so the steps involved with selling a car, right? You have to get it like detailed and super clean, and then you have to make sure it runs and that the tires are full, and you have to know where the keys are for all of this. And this is not always, if you're very cluttered, knowing where the keys are is a problem. And if you don't have keys, you have to get the keys made. You have to have the paperwork and the title ready to sign over. So all of that can be so daunting and overwhelming that you can never do it. I know exactly why we get cluttered and why CPTSD is correlated with this. Like, it's just too much if you're very dysregulated. So this is another case of sometimes the easy way out is to donate. And obviously, if your car has great value, you still want the money. But my family's done this before when we had a car that was kind of a clunker and we couldn't deal with all the steps. We donated it, and they just come and take it. And they take it even if you don't have the paperwork, even if it doesn't run. There's somebody who wants that car. And that's really helpful to a person like me who can get overwhelmed and everything gets stuck and I can't plan anything unless I solve the problems right in front of my face. Toiletries. Let's talk about toiletries. So a few months ago, I bought some good makeup. I've talked about that here before. It was such a big deal in my life. Finally, I've got like really good makeup. I'm wearing it now. How do you like it, right? But I used to have just like the very cheapest stuff from Walgreens. Like, I was putting stuff on my eyes that wouldn't even stay on my eyes, and it was $5 and little splinters were getting in my eyes, and it probably causes cancer. I don't know. It's what I had and it's what I was used to, and it comes from growing up poor. But I'm at a point in my life where having the makeup be together and look nice and kind of stay on my eyes and not go running down is important to me. So I hired an expert. And her name is Maria Riley. She's a makeup artist, and I had hired her for professional video shoots that I used to run before, but I hired her just for me. And she came and helped me, and she showed me, she told me what to buy and what makeup to get, and she taught me how to apply the makeup. And it was this really great day. It was kind of stressful, and it just was a lot to learn for me. I never really knew, I airbrush my face with foundation. Yeah, right? I didn't even know you could airbrush foundation onto your face, but it just looks better, and I don't know, it looks great. So I have a little airbrush, and I have these little pods, and, I have to maintain it all. I have to wash my brushes, and it's this whole thing. But when Maria was sitting with me showing me this, she said, first, get out everything that you have right now. And so I showed her all my makeup, and she was so cool and non-judgmental about my crappy old stuff. She's like, this nail polish, I can't open it. I'm like, oh yeah, I bought that in 1999 to put my kid's initial on his toothbrush. It's a long time ago, and it doesn't open anymore. And she said, okay, well, anything that's old and not usable anymore, you can just throw out. There was some stuff that was old and you could still use it, but now I had a new, better version of it, but it was halfway used makeup. And I was like, what can we do with this? Can we give it to somebody? She was like, no, you can't give old makeup to people. Throw it out. And so, this part of me that's so thrifty, I can't stand throwing things out. I got used to it. It's like, I have better stuff now. I don't need this anymore. I'm truly not going to use it anymore. And nobody else wants my 15-year-old bronzer, and they definitely don't want my 2-year-old mascara that's kind of dried out, They don't want it. It's unsanitary, and you just throw it out. So that was kind of freeing for me. And I noticed that a little bit of hoarding style was there, that I had an emotional attachment. This was the makeup from 20 years ago. I was young back then. I had little babies. I was a new mom. And by throwing out the stuff that belonged to me at that time, and likewise with the pants I'm never going to fit into again, it just was this idea of a time that I could go back to. And I had to get it into my mind that it's okay It's okay to get rid of the belongings of that time, because the way that we can revisit those times is looking at pictures, having memories, or really just living in the present and having a good time now. There's so many ways, for example, that I'm more like a young person in my life now, in that I'm lighter hearted. I feel more free spirited. I can have fun at a party. I don't sit there just like sour, feeling like everybody hates me. Like, I'm kind of younger than I've ever been. So it's okay, not to have the belongings anymore. And I'm telling you, the pants from like 1999 and with the big bell bottoms and stuff, I don't even want them anymore. I can't button them. So it's all good. So those I donated. And, God help the people who actually want to wear those old pants, but maybe they do. And I just trust that Goodwill will sort it all out, and whatever should be recycled as fabric, they're going to take care of it, and I can stop grieving it or anything. But it's out of my closet. Whether it's sentimentality or fear of that you'll be in lack in the future, or feeling done with it, but not having the inner power to, just make the time and put it on your schedule and do it. Power is what you need. Whatever the step that you need to take is, the thing that's going to propel you into that step is inner power. So I'm going to talk about how to get that inner power within this video, but I just want to cover clutter a little more. So let's go over the other dimensions of clutter that hold you back and keep you from feeling open to life and ready for good things to come in. All right. One of them is mental clutter. One thing I can say from my own experience of childhood PTSD is the stuff that I'm holding in my mind can get very crowded. And I'm sure there's some sort of problem with trauma that makes thoughts and ideas, harder to sort and remember and process in a good way, to move them along. And that clutter of the mind there, it makes it hard to focus. It makes it hard to prioritize things appropriately. And it makes it hard for me to notice that I have choices when I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like the world gets very small. Like I'm just like, I'm so overwhelmed, there's nothing I can do. And then I bring that dysregulation down and the choices open back up again. So I rely heavily on to-do lists, timers, and calendars so that I can predict when I'm clear-headed what I need to be doing each day and then write down a plan. Now, I know not everybody is a planner. I am a planner. Plans help me get stuff out of my mind. I know if I write it down, I don't have to keep reminding myself, don't forget, drop the rent. Now, I don't always stick to my plan. In fact, I almost never stick entirely to my plan because my plans are a little too ambitious. But I don't have to waste time throughout the day trying to figure out what I need to do next. I've already put them in ranked order priority of what I'm going to do. And I declutter my mind twice a day by doing my daily practice techniques, which helps me move, fearful, resentful thoughts out of my mind and onto paper so that I have more of my mind available to actually think and envision things and do things. And there's a link to my daily practice course down in the description section of this video and all my videos if you want to try it. It's free. Anybody can try it. And that's one way to find out if it helps you too, to clear your mind, is give it a try. Okay, then there's emotional clutter. And mostly by this, I mean old beliefs and resentments that once were true that you've been telling yourself and telling other people way past the expiration date. Like, did a boyfriend in high school make out with your best friend? Well, that happened to me. I only found out about it from the friend when I was an adult, and I had a good hard cry about it for 10 minutes, and I was really sad. And then for about 4 months, I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't let it go. I was really resentful. Eventually, the friendship with the friend fell apart, not because of this directly, but I think that when the truth of the relationship came out, I don't know, it just didn't hold. We've been friends a long time. But what she did, I did think a little less of her, even though it was so long ago. I mean, it was literally back in the 70s. And we did drift apart. But now, because of my daily practice, the emotions about it are just like, they're not there. I have no tears about it at all. Like, I remember it. It's a fact, but I'm not carrying this emotional clutter, this resentment at her, or this victimization like, oh, it could have been so great with this boyfriend if she hadn't come along. I have no illusions about that. Sometimes the hurtful things that happen are an indicator of the instability and ungoodness of the things in your life, the relationships in your life. And so we get emotionally cluttered sometimes when we hold on with that sort of shoulda, coulda, woulda thinking, or, they owe me an apologize. I can't let this go until they apologize. So we're sort of freezing stuff in amber emotionally, and it becomes an identity, right? And these are some of the phases I've had to go through sometimes in healing. Like, it was really healing for me at a certain point to go, you know what I am? I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. And that was like my whole thing for a while. And gradually I did a lot of healing around that and the things that go with that. And I also noticed that there's stuff going on with me that's a problem that has nothing to do with that. And to solve those problems, it helped me to free up and start going, I'm a person who has a lot of things. I've had some hard things. I've had some advantages. I will always be an adult child of an alcoholic, but that is so not my primary identity anymore. I'm a person with complex PTSD, but I'm always telling people, your trauma is an injury, but it's not an identity. It's not what you are. And so carrying all this stuff, like this terrible stuff happened, I can never change. There are a few problems in life that actually can't be changed, right? One example I use is losing a limb. You cannot get another limb, but you can get a workaround. You can often get a prosthetic that will help you do many things, and your life can continue to blossom anyway. And so that is an uncluttered approach to dealing with life's hardship, is not to carry it around forever. Like, it's always going to take some time to deal with the grief and sadness and disappointment and anger of what has happened. But soon, with healthy healing, it gets moved down the conveyor belt, down into the past. Space opens up again for new experiences, new relationships, and yes, new heartaches, new ones. Life goes on. Emotional clutter also comes in the form of seeking out social media people you're obsessed with, or seeking out news about things that make you angry. Like, anger is the drug, like being different than, better than, disagreeing with, hateful towards some other kind of person. And that's a drug, and that is clutter. Outrage is total emotional clutter. If the news you read isn't helping you be informed so that you can be more useful, it's clutter, all right? It's emotional clutter, and it's probably making you sick, and it's probably getting passed on to other people and making their world difficult. I really urge you to pay attention and prioritize what is useful. So just like you would go through a drawer and keep the jeans that you still wear and get rid of the ones that you're never going to wear, when you're consuming media, what is the stuff that's actually useful to you, like necessary for your job or truly entertaining and uplifting for you? Great. I'm all for people being informed, but we are so far beyond like being informed anymore with the level of information that is designed to agitate us and clutter us up emotionally. And the consequence of that is a lot of division and isolation. And trust me, as a traumatized person, you don't need extra of that. So if your media consumption is causing you to feel separate from people, if it's causing you to feel turned against or victimized by people in a way that you didn't used to, then it's clutter. If it's helping you recognize a problem that you can solve or that you need to address, it's useful. That's basically the formula. Now, finally, emotional clutter can be the sad stories that we tell ourselves about stuff like, I was the black sheep in my family and now I can never feel like I belong, or I was rejected by my mom and I just can't have relationships. Those are things that I've believed about myself before. And thankfully, I got those out of the cupboard. And I made space for a new idea and a new experience to come in. And I get this a lot in the letters people write to me, and somebody was writing in, I spent years waiting for this girlfriend to get done with school, and then she didn't want me anymore, and they felt wronged for all those years. And it had been years and years since it had happened, and then now they could never have an education. And I'm just going to say, yeah, no, that sucks, but there was nothing stopping you from doing whatever you wanted to do with your life while you were in that relationship or now. And there are certain relationships that stop you, that do stop people. Abusive relationships, coercive ones, being trapped in terrible poverty, being incarcerated. These are some reasons why people legitimately get stuck. But a lot of times this is learned helplessness. We're like the little bird in a cage, the door's open, but we never think to fly out. Those stories you tell yourself, this cage, I can never get out, they need to be questioned. You need to ask yourself, is that true? Is that true? Is there another way? What would happen if I walked out of the cage? And the circumstances of your life, I know it's going to include some things that are hard and some things that are easy, some things that are probably never going to be solved, and some things that are just 1 second away, just one little decision away, and some things that are so massive that you don't really have control over them. But you start with the thing that you can do. You start with the thing right in front of you. People with CPTSD get overwhelmed, and overwhelm is this feeling like, I see 100 things to do, where do I even start? You just start with the thing in front of you. One thing that you can try right now is just take a fast. Do a day where you don't talk about a certain problem anymore. You might even take a fast from thinking about it. It's, you can't totally control your thoughts, but when you notice you're thinking it again, divert your thoughts to something else. Just for a day, just to teach yourself about that space that you actually do have within you, where you're not consumed by this problem that happened, this limitation that was put on you at one time. And just see if there isn't like a little door in that cage. There's real life possibilities in front of you right now, and to see them, you might need to move past those hurts and let them recede into the past. And I keep promising you this. I will talk about how to do that, okay? But I want to talk about a couple more kinds of clutter. Relationship clutter, and I'm talking about all kinds of relationships. Friends, coworkers, family, people in the romantic category. If you have CPTSD, chances are you have a shortage of people with whom you feel safe and good and seen and heard, who get you. And you have an abundance of people you don't like, you don't want to deal with, but you're forced to see them, either because they live in the same building as you, or you feel obligated, or they work where you work, or you carry this thing like, I don't know, it's probably just me. I should keep putting up with this person who really makes me feel terrible because it's probably just me. That's a trauma thing. So relationship decluttering means you make space in your life to enjoy people with whom you have affinity. You like them, you feel good, you inspire each other, or you have a common purpose like you're working or raising children together. And you do this by gently removing people who don't really belong in your life anymore. It's better to have fewer people who are good for you than a whole bunch of people who just make you feel relationship cluttered. You don't have to have a great reason for stepping back from a relationship. It helps to have clarity, though. And if you need clarity about who those people are, my Connection Bootcamp talks about that, so you can check that out if you're interested. All right, finally, there's time clutter. And I think this one, you know what I'm talking about. That's where you take too much on. And this is the problem of overfunctioners who get their need for approval and meaning met by saying yes to things and having accomplishments and having this sense of a very colorful, busy calendar. These can be good things, but if you're not having time for friends or exercise or learning or adequate sleep or healing your trauma, then your time is too cluttered. You need some space in your life that is unscheduled, that's unspoken for, and it's open for you to decide in the moment how you want to spend that, even if it's just sitting there staring at the wall. Because it's in those down times that you can really recharge your batteries to get new ideas, you can make changes, you can do something really big with your life that you couldn't have done when you were chained up to other people's timelines and other people's agendas. And that's one of the functions of meditation, is to sort of schedule and bring in that quiet time for that new inspiration to come in. The thing is, when you stop being cluttered all over your life, openness does come, and so does responsibility. And sometimes that urge to clutter up your mind, your heart, your time, your home, it's a way to hold life away from you. It's covert avoidance is something I call that. Life is hard sometimes. It can be triggering. And for that, what you really want is boundaries and ability to make decisions and say no. But clutter, I believe, is a low-grade barrier to keep your life manageable. I'd actually put debt in that column too, like getting in debt, staying in debt. It's a way to hold life back. I have no choices. I have to stay stuck where I am because actually thinking about my next step is stressful. It's triggering, but that's not a good way to accomplish, self-care and to treat that feeling of being overwhelmed and triggered all the way. The side effects of that, it's isolation. It's getting frozen in amber instead of growing, and it's getting isolated and making everything in the end unmanageable. It gets more stressful, not less stressful, when you shut life out. So even if you don't know what your next step is yet, consider just opening up to something better in your life, because there's greatness in you, and it needs room to breathe and grow beyond the trauma, beyond what was done to you in the past. And one way that you can begin to step into that good energy of change and growth is by decluttering. You can start where you are with just one closet or one thing on your calendar that needs to be taken off, by ending a friendship that no longer serves you, or by letting go of an old grudge that you held against someone that really is not going to change anything whether you have the grudge or not. When you make space in your life, some old trauma-driven feelings and thoughts are definitely going to surface. And so to keep your decluttering steady and sustained and not fall back into it or start piling things up again in every sense of the word, you'll need tools to help you face and release the friction that arises, the feelings that used to get stuffed down by your inability to take action, push it down, keep avoiding. So if you want to open up to this and be able to process those feelings that come up, one thing I recommend to you is to try my daily practice techniques. They are free. It's an online course that you can complete. You can learn the techniques in less than an hour, and there's a whole bunch of FAQ videos to learn the fine points. Once in a while, I get a letter seeking my advice that's so serious that I'm not sure I should even read it on YouTube. Usually I decline, but in the case of a letter I received just a few days ago, I couldn't stop thinking about the danger that everyone is in, and thought I'd better tell the letter writer, who asked me to be as harsh as I needed to be, the urgent truth. So here goes. I'll call this man Mitchell, and this is what he told me. Hi, my story of limerence is long and painful. I'm 37 years old, and this has been going on since I was 13 or so. I understand limerence quite well. I've read the literature, the videos, therapists, lifestyle changes, medication. I've been through it all. I'm hoping you've got some perspective for me, harsh or otherwise. All right, I've got the fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to, and let's go through, and I'll share with you what's going on in his life. My childhood featured an alcoholic father, an overbearing and nagging mother, and a whole lot of fighting. My parents would often just put me between them. I'd be forced to be the peacekeeper as young as 8 or 9. I remember being terrified of feeling my parents weren't in control, like I was the adult. I learned to become whatever the situation called for. I used to think of myself as a chameleon, able to shift to keep the waters calm. My mantra during the fighting was to tell myself, I'm a rock. I do not feel, as if I did, one of them would use it as fuel. They'd play me off each other constantly, and Dad says, don't tell Mom about the drinking. Mom knows he's been drinking and asked me to confirm. I became what my therapist described as a master compartmentalizer before the age of 10. I have a strong urge to help people. I've always felt that the only way people will accept me is if I'm doing something for them. Fast forward to my 20s. I'm hyper independent. I moved out as soon as possible, and I put myself through university, got a dream job, moved to the city, all that stuff I thought would fix me as a kid. I just kept my nose down. I met a girl. She was beautiful, smart, sweet, everything I could have hoped for, and she loved me. I don't think I ever really stopped to think if I ever truly loved her the way she loved me. I felt a combination of guilt, safety, and security with her. She had a few issues, and I showed her how to become independent and strong. We got married and had a child, and things were good. The child turned out to be severely disabled. I knew early on, and exhausted all my resources to try and fix the problem that wasn't really fixable. I was destroyed. I felt it was somehow my fault. I felt like someone kicked me in the chest for a solid year. My child was obsessed with long car rides. by the age of 2, and I didn't mind as it gave my wife a break from a challenging situation. That's when it happened. I saw a girl on the side of the road in danger. She was laying down and not moving. I called from the car to see if she needed help. She didn't move. I swooped in like the foolish rescuer I am and got involved, called 911 and performed rescue breathing to reverse her overdose. She was homeless, badly mentally ill, and a drug addict, but I literally saved her life. I looked for her until I found her again, and she remembered me, and she was so sweet. I'll never forget the glimmer. It made me feel things I'd never felt. I've read that limerence is charged by drama, uncertainty, etc. This girl had it all. I'd start seeking her out on my drives. I didn't know why, but she was a magnet for me. I was hooked badly. She pressed every button in me. I didn't stand a chance. She took me to places I'd never dreamed I'd go over the course of the next 3 years. I won't get into specifics, but I've learned to navigate the mental health system, the legal system, the streets, and everything between for her. I'll never forget when I eventually found myself in a crack house, my number painted on the wall. I made a deal with a decent guy that ran this flop house. He wouldn't let anyone exploit her. In exchange, I'd help him with some personal goals. He was really into things I did professionally. I never did the drugs. I used to say she was addicted to drugs, and I was addicted to her. I fought hard. I told my wife early on, and she was incredibly supportive. I'd often get the girl admitted to the hospital for care, partly to give myself a break, and because she needed to. She'd go off the rails after a few days of drug use by this point and become extremely vulnerable. She spent almost all her time calling me and trying to find me. When I changed my number, she just kept going to the places I frequented, asking for me. She overdosed and died eventually. I was devastated, but within a week, I felt a sense of relief like none other. I got very lucky to get out. I still think it was a gift. All right. My marriage was never really the same. I simply did too much damage. There was love, but I think deep down we both knew that splitting up would badly hurt our son, who required massive support, both in daily life and financially. We moved past as best we could. I took the advice that seemed best. I started my own business, set and met lofty goals. Things between my wife and I were just fine. I had largely resigned myself to a life of relative loneliness and servitude. I wanted to do the right thing. Leaving my family at this point to try and seek happiness wasn't something I felt capable of doing. When I was growing up, I learned to be selfish because I had to entirely rely on myself, but leaving the marriage was a line I wouldn't cross. I learned to never go down to that part again. But one day I was in a store and I saw a young girl getting cornered by security. I witnessed them toss her out for some personal hygiene items she was trying to steal. I bought the items and found her outside. She was so nice, hugged me, and told me her name, and it was over before I knew what I had even done. It all came back, and I knew it at that moment. I tried to put it out of my mind, but my son wanted his car rides, and I had a new limerent object. A limerent object, by the way, is the person where you direct limerence. Limerence is an addictive obsession with another person that is so strong, even though it's not possible to be together, it's so strong it just destroys everything else in your life and it destroys your availability for real love. So this would be the right word for this, but this is an extreme case. It's been about 4 months. I've become her entire support system. My wife doesn't know. It was manageable until she started to become limerent for me. I fueled the fire. She has nobody except me. She views me as her boyfriend and has largely reduced her substance use and moved back in with an old relative to try and reclaim her life. She tells me she's falling for me. I wanted her to be using me, but I can't deny that I've injected myself into her life and made myself her limerent object. She doesn't know it, but I know the signs. She's registered for treatment. All she talks about is getting sober so we can be together for real. I know this isn't real. The addiction is strong for me as well. I'm feeling extremely guilty, as I know if I pull away now, she's going to be even more doomed. I tried to speed run the limerence. When she wanted things to become physical, I didn't stop it. I told myself if I just go through the stages, I'll be out faster. I'm already starting to feel deterioration. She's still in there, but I'm trying to be very clinical in how I get through this. I never expected it to be reciprocated. I even put myself into a position to be rejected so she'd crush me and I could try to move on. It backfired badly. She's just starting to really ramp up now. I don't know how to get out of this in one piece without someone dying. If I end up actually with her, it'll be the end of me. And if I try to stop now, she will definitely die. I know it sounds like an excuse, but I put myself into a position in her life without thinking of the full consequences of my actions, should they be effective. I don't want to abandon her, but I know I must. I'm the only male figure she's ever had that was positive for her. She's been badly abused by the worst kind of men, and I broke down her walls and forced myself in. It's not much different than the first girl, except this one isn't fully gone yet. She's close, but has hope, and I'm about to smash it to bits, if I can even muster the courage. I don't really know how to live life like this. Even if I get past this one, I'll be back to where I started, except this time I've exhausted my purposeful living ideas. I've got a business that's successful that I'll lose if I leave. My large home is key to my business. Rent is very unaffordable where I live. Everyone will suffer greatly all around. Things are very stable for my son right now, but if I were to leave, it would upend him in the worst way. All right, Mitchell. Okay, I'm going to respond to this. So I would say this is an emergency. This is an emergency situation for you. Let me go through what you told me. So you had this rough past, and I get it. Like, basically all the letters I ever receive are from people who had these rough pasts. So I understand. I know it played a role. I don't think we need to dwell on it much. It's not relevant right now. The crisis is you in present time, all right? This thing where it's like, oh, you always felt you could fix people. I'm going to ask you to forget that thought. That sounds like a rationalization. Maybe it was your pattern. Who knows? It doesn't matter what your pattern has ever been. It doesn't matter how you got that way, because that information is not useful here to correcting the situation before somebody is terribly hurt. All right. My child was a severely disabled kid. That is so rough, and I'm sorry. And this thing where your wife loves you and she's great, but you're not sure you love her, well, it sounds like you have a bit of avoidance there. Right now, because you have a severely disabled child, trying to have like the ultimate great love in your marriage is a luxury fantasy right now. Most marriages are about practical day-to-day love, and that's what you have. And I'm going to just really say so strongly, do not F it up. Do not F it up. So you have a good marriage. You have somebody who's there with you, and you guys are dealing with the hand of cards you've been dealt, which is a severely disabled kid who needs you. And there it is. So the car rides is what worked. All right. Yeah. All right. I get it. Your kid needs car rides, but that is no reason for you to be sniffing around where this obsession you have with broken bird girls is. I'm going to get to the tough love with what you're going to need to do, but those days are over. You can't use your kid as an excuse to be out there doing that. You can't be doing this in front of your kid. You can't be doing this as the father of this kid, and you can't be doing this to your wife, and you can't be doing it to these poor women who are so fragile. So let me get to that. All right. So when you saw this girl not moving on the side of the road, I don't think it was foolish to stop and call 911 and do rescue breathing to reverse the overdose. You did save her life, and that was the right thing to do. Then you found out how vulnerable you are. So I'll tell you something. It's a pattern sometimes for men. And this is, men and women have mostly common symptoms, but here's the thing that happens to men sometimes when they become fathers, is they freak out and they do something extremely drastic. They go through some personal transformation that makes them impossible for their partner to stay with, and everything is ruined. And you are doing that right now. And it's an impulse, it's an immature impulse. It might be trauma driven, but it doesn't matter what causes it. You don't get to do it right now, okay? You just don't get to do this. And so you develop limerence, you can remember the glimmer, you could feel it. I think you have a very clear eyes that this is an addiction and it's sick and it's unhealthy, but there's something I don't think you're seeing very well. Now, I've been dragged down by relationships before, and I understand what's going on here. And these are pretty severe markers of going down where, you're having to navigate the legal system, mental health system, streets, and then eventually be in a crack house trying to make a deal with the proprietor to trade help for her. So, yeah, okay, I can understand your motives here, but it's you knew for a long time that this was sick for you. This is not a healthy thing. This is not something you and your wife are doing together. It's like your private thing, using your kid as a prop to justify it. So yeah, she was addicted to drugs, you were addicted to her, and there you are. You're an addict. That's what it is. You are an addict. And you say, I fought hard, and you told your wife, and she was incredibly supportive. And I just had to circle that. I'm like, why? Why would she be supportive about you being obsessed with a woman who's a drug addict? I would be very alarmed by something like that. So you didn't tell me much about that. I'm just going to assume that she had some sort of good faith in the beginning. And if she found out what's really going on now, she would not. This would be terrible, absolutely destructive to her. So you'd get the girl admitted to the hospital just to not deal with her. You managed to cut off contact, block her. She'd look for you. And then when she died, and I've had that happen too. I've had a partner die. I've had 2 partners die of drugs, of overdoses. And I was also devastated, and I was also incredibly relieved at the end of it because I wasn't able to get out myself. So I do understand. You were lucky to get out. It's a shame that it had to be that way, but we don't have to link your story with her story. Her story was she was going where she was going, and you got sidetracked and you got set free to stay with your family and show up for them as they depend on you to do. So your marriage was damaged. And so that's what I don't understand. You say that it was too much damage, but your wife was supportive. So I don't really understand what that is. Is she just codependent and thinks she has to be nice? Is she terrified that you're going to leave and she has to put up with any amount of, we call that crap fitting, when you fit yourself to an unacceptable situation or person? I don't know, but it is unacceptable, whether she knows it or not. And you did the best you could. You moved past it. You started a business. So you did all these outward signs, but there was not healing in yourself. You got an escape from that situation, but you didn't heal. You knew that you couldn't leave the marriage, and I'm glad you didn't. And then you wouldn't go to that part of the town, but then your son wanted the ride, and that's you're bullshitting, right? Like, if you really have to drive your car, you don't have to go there. And with so much at stake, I want you to just cut the bullshit. Just cut it out. This has nothing to do with your son's need for rides. This is your addiction. So you helped a girl who got busted shoplifting, and then you rescued her. And then next thing you know, now here's where you're going into magical thinking, where you say, I've become her whole support system. I'm the only positive man in her life. So here's why I'm going to give you the tough love. You're a terrible man in her life. You're married. You have a kid. You have an addiction. Addicted love is not real love. You're not going to be with her no matter how this plays out. This is not the real thing. You have something very, very hurt and destructive inside you that must be healed. Everything you do out of this addiction hurts people, including her. You're not. So I just, you asked me to be harsh, and I think this is what you needed me to say. You're not the good guy you imagine yourself to be. You're not saving anybody. You're injecting yourself. You're creating a false dependency on them. And while that's real, that is no excuse to continue another day in this relationship. So maybe you want to call a crisis center and tell them the situation, or call a doctor or therapist or homeless shelter. But I'm going to ask you, Mitchell, please never have contact with her again. And if you want the doctor or the therapist or the social worker or the crisis center to pass this message that you can't have contact again and send her your good wishes, do that. But please do not use anything as an excuse to keep this terrible situation alive. Everything that you do is poison right now. Stop the poison. Stop the contact. You haven't told your wife yet, and I don't know if you should. I'm going to say that you really need to be with a professional helper on this, a therapist, a specialist in sex and love addiction. And also, I'm going to put it out there, there is a program called Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, also Sex Addicts Anonymous for men, and you need to be in a men's-only program. And I'm going to really lay down the law here and say you should not go to meetings that are mixed gender. You should not be, everybody in a 12-step meeting is a broken bird. So you should not, you need to like dry out, my friend, dry out, and be away from damaged women and be away from any kind of temptation while you start to get really, really honest with people who care about you and who get it about what's been going on. I think you are in danger as a person, spiritually, but also like this is what really can take people down to the edge of survival. And I'm just going to caution you so strongly, go get help. Go get help. Now, here's the thing. You need to be discerning. You need to simultaneously be the person who's suffering and the person who's looking at the suffering you and making better decisions. Because if you want to, you can find a therapist who will enable you to keep doing this, who will just sit there and talk in circles with you about your feelings about it, rather than to get in there with the moral emergency that this is and really the survival emergency that it is for your family, for your wife and your child, for the woman involved, and for you. So this is an emergency. And so please stay away from any helpers who don't see it as that and who will enable you to keep going. You will always find people who will enable you about this. You can go to a bar and get drunk with some guys and say, my wife, my kid, it's such a burden I have. And you can get people to enable you any time you want to. But you're going to have to be strong and refuse to do that. Do not get enabled. Get with the people who will help you be strong and draw the line on this. So yeah, this dream of like perfect marriage, oh yes, it just hurts. It hurts to know that it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a perfect child. Your child has a disability. I don't know what it is. I'm guessing it's something that takes a huge amount of care. And this is one of the things that a lot of families of disabled kids struggle with, perhaps with severely autistic kids. There are a lot of conditions that could be like that. And you know what helps them? To be in support groups with other parents who do that. And I know people who do this. They have close fellowship and family friendships with other parents who are going through this and other kids, and they work together to advocate in schools and from their counties to get the care they need. And this is what's happened. Life is not just like we get to drive off and have no problems. Life has problems, and life has beautiful things in it, and the problems and the beautiful things are linked together. And I know that having a disabled kid is a hard thing. I know it's a hard thing, but it's also this incredible opportunity for you as a person to come out of this, I'm going to call it, this selfish desire to, have this, to be this like rescuer, to save somebody, to just run away from it all, and to stay and show up and be there for the people whose lives you have committed to honor your commitment to them. And it's one thing when parents get divorced, when the kids are easy and don't need a lot of care, it's still destructive. But where this is right now, where it probably takes one parent home full time, please don't do that. Please stay and give your love and your efforts and your fatherly and husbandly energy to these two people who totally deserve your ongoing commitment and who will benefit tremendously because you can give that to them, and who will suffer horribly if you don't. So with a therapist, decide what your wife needs to know. I'm not going to try to take that on, when I don't really know you or enough about the situation. But I'm going to call out the emergency for what it is. I would let go of this idea that this girl's life depends on you continuing to be there as this fake boyfriend, this tormented soul who's in there like ruining his whole life and really lying about his emotional availability for her. I've gone ahead and blown this video by saying bullshit again and again, but it's bullshit, all right? You're not good for her. I like the idea of you contacting a professional who will know what's going on and communicate your farewell to her. But no contact is how we do this. No contact. And if you're ready to take that seriously, go get that professional help. Check in with Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous and get immediately with people who you can tell the truth to, who will help you make strong, good, caring, loving, wise, human, responsible decisions about this. All right? I send you my love. I invite everybody in the comments. Please don't criticize. Please give your support and love to Mitchell, who needs it right now. All right? One thing I don't like about watching YouTube videos about trauma is how much we talk about trauma and sad stuff and problems. And I know the problems are real, but everything you do to work on those problems can go nowhere if you're not also learning to lift your mood, to actually generate flashes of joy, because that is what you need to give you the strength to persevere in the daily work of healing old patterns and changing your life. And I mean changing for real, a change. This is why my favorite video that I've made is one that tells you actual literal things that you can do right now to lift your mood and feel better. And I'm bringing this back from the archive for you right here because, well, we need to feel better. In order to heal, we need to start by feeling better. It can't be put off. So here it is. What I'm about to say is going to challenge a lot of people watching right now, but here it is. No matter what's going on in your life, it's possible to lift your mood and feel happier even when the circumstances of your life are depressing and hard. Now, you can't solve all your problems at once, but feeling at least a little bit better is the first step, getting the inner power that you need to come up a little bit so that you can start making changes in your life. With that little bit of healing, you'll be clearer about your next steps. And when you keep on this path, one foot after the other, you can actually heal from the past and start making the changes in your life that will make your continuing happiness possible. Change and healing are definitely possible, especially when you know how to increase your inner power a little bit when you need to. And I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, saying that you can feel happier today is almost countercultural. A lot of people are invested in the idea that, well, there's the pessimist. The damage is done. Happiness is gone forever. The world is a terrible place. And I've suffered all these losses. And I know that's true. I've suffered the losses too. There's some truth in this pessimistic thinking that there's no hope at all, but really it's just another self-defeating behavior to become totally identified with the problem and completely resistant to the solution. And at the other end of the spectrum are people who say that suffering is just a state of mind and you just need to visualize your awesome reality. And well, that's just bypassing this inconvenient truth that healing your life actually does involve self-awareness and actual change. There's effort involved. And somewhere between those two are so-called like helpers who tell you, well, healing is possible, but the only way to get there is to get really, really sad and dwell more on what happened to you. And it's going to take a long time. And if you tell them that, hey, it doesn't feel like it's working for me, they'll say, well, it has to get a lot worse before it gets better. Well, I wouldn't listen to those people. And that's the pessimists, the bypassing optimists, and that it's got to feel really bad and that's going to go on for a long time. All of it. These are three places where I see people who have trauma get really stuck. And the fact is, if you're carrying trauma around, becoming free of it is going to be a lot of small and practical changes that you sustain over time. And you can do that. And it does need to help you feel better, like quickly. Today, it needs to feel better. When life gets hard, you need a way to get emotional relief when you need it. And then you need practical day-by-day strategies to stay feeling happier and to build that happy life. So I want to show you some simple and practical ways to get an instant lift for your mood and energy. Even just a little positive change is worth it, and it can lead to the big changes that you're looking for. And you might find that these little steps I'm going to show you lead to much more than little changes and a little bit of uplift. Sometimes really good things happen. And I know this because I'm someone who has had a lot of suffering in my life. I've had good things, but I've had long periods of loneliness, the death of people I love, medical problems, very serious ones, financial problems, and definitely relationship problems. And here's the thing. I learned to be happier before these problems were solved. Being happier gave me so much more power to see the solutions and to take action. So these are simple strategies that you can use whenever you're in a bad place, depressed, angry, dysregulated, exhausted, feeling like you can't pull yourself together or you can't pop out of it. Now remember, you don't always have to know the reason you're feeling bad. What I'm teaching you doesn't depend on knowing that or any kind of knowledge at all. It's not about figuring out the past or making people apologize. It's none of those things. Those are nice. But sometimes it helps to take your focus off the past and off the pain for a while. And I'm not telling you to go into denial or to just repeat affirmations that the problems don't exist. You don't have to believe anything, in fact, to try this. You don't have to accept anything. I'm not someone who can really accept things that I don't believe in anyway. I tend to go on experience. If things feel fake, well, I just prefer to try things and see how it goes. If it works, adopt it. So try that with me. It's possible to influence your mood with practical actions that let you still be your real self, not lose track of the problems in your life that actually need solving at some point, and to get into the habit of feeling better so that you don't have to go through all the steps of getting there every time you're feeling down. It'll start to be your natural default state. So the first thing to do, are you ready, is to get up an hour earlier than you normally would. And I can hear the chorus of people going, I can't do that. I already have insomnia. I work a late shift. And you don't have to take any of my advice, and you don't have to do any of one particular thing in this list of things I'm going to give you. But I am going to say you can get up earlier. And yes, you might be a bit tired in the afternoon, but it's a good way to reduce the stress that makes mornings such a vulnerable time for overwhelm, for discombobulation, for dysregulation and depression. When you get up early and you get up out of bed, you're freeing yourself from both hurrying to get out of the house, which can be a major trigger for dysregulation, by the way, and you're freeing yourself from immobilization, where you stay in bed for too long after you wake up, which is like a big open door for depressed emotions. So get up an hour earlier, then get up out of bed. And what to do about being tired? Nothing. Being tired is not an emergency. Get a hot beverage if you enjoy that. I'm a coffee person. Maybe you are too, or you like something different, but get your beverage and then move forward to the second thing that you can do to feel happier, which is to do some writing. Now, some people write in their journals. I teach techniques that help you get your anxious and depressed thoughts out of your head and onto paper, which is different than journaling. If you want to learn my technique, you can always find the link to my free course called The Daily Practice down in the description section underneath all my videos. It's also on my website at Crappy Childhood Fairy. By the way, you can see everything that I offer there if you want to go there. crappychildhoodfairy.com. When you get your fear and resentment out of your head and onto paper, your mind gets a little vacation and your thoughts are free to happen. And maybe even inspired thoughts are going to visit you. Not just a bunch of worrying and rumination, but, constructive things that come to your mind. In my daily practice technique, there's a process to both name those negative thoughts and release them, or ask for them to be removed if you have a higher power, which I do. And it's so important that you don't write these fears and resentments as a form of ranting. Just, I hate this, I fear this, I fear resent that, but more as a process for naming and releasing those thoughts that are otherwise spinning the hamster wheel of doom in your mind. Hamster wheel of doom. Do you have that? So you may relate to the fact that I wake up irritable and anxious sometimes, which is a complex PTSD thing. So this practice is important for me. It brings emotional fresh air that empowers me, and it empowers me to have a fruitful and productive and happy day. The third thing to do is to meditate. Now, I meditate for 20 minutes twice a day. If you can even do 5 minutes, it makes a huge difference. And by meditation, I don't necessarily mean anything difficult. You don't have to sit in a special way. You don't have to have an empty mind or focus on your breath or anything. You just rest with your eyes closed, maybe with a mantra, like a simple word like okay or this. Some word that reminds you that you're meditating but doesn't put a lot of demands. And don't use guided meditations. That's a completely different thing to put information in. You're not there to learn a new thing. You're there to release and rest. Now, you may have an established meditation practice, and if that's really easy for you, use that one. Now, a lot of people, I hear they criticize themselves and say, you know what, I can't really meditate. I just think so much. I do it wrong. And that's precisely why people like us need to meditate. It's because we have an active mind, a mind that is designed, in fact, to think. So we just give it a nice rest and take off all expectation that it'll be perfect or have no thoughts or be perfectly empty like a still pond. It's never like that, is it? It might not even feel like a good meditation, but you don't have to be good at meditating to just start meditating. You start where you are. You start writing fears and resentments on paper beforehand, which is how the daily practice is sequenced. Writing, then meditation, specific form of writing, easy meditation. They go together and it starts getting easier all around. The fourth thing for lifting your mood is to exercise hard. Now, there was a time when I had acute PTSD, and if you've ever heard my story, there have been a couple of times in my life where some really traumatic things happened, where the PTSD symptoms were so strong I could barely work or hold a conversation. My mind was seriously stressed, and it was scattered, and my body was having full adrenal freak out several times a day. And every time something reminded me of one particularly traumatic experience, when someone close to me had died, I'd flash back to the memory of that experience, and adrenaline would whoosh through me, and my heart would pound and my thoughts would scatter, and it was really debilitating. So this PTSD reaction had been going on for months, and I happened to see a doctor, and she said, well, how many times a day are you having these freak out episodes you're telling me about? And I was like, not that much, just like 10 or 20 times a day. And she said, okay, we're going to have to start putting you on some medication. Well, I didn't want to do that. And the reason is I had such a dramatic healing from terrible depression earlier on in my life. And when I first found my daily practice, I recovered from that depression. I never went down to that place again. And I felt like I'd gone from such a chaotic mental state to such a good one. I really have not wanted to mess with psychoactive drugs, lest I go back to that place where I thought I would never get out of. And so I try to avoid antidepressants. So I didn't want to do it. I told her I'd come back in a couple weeks, though. And instead of taking drugs, I told her I would try some other things. And I went online and I searched, what does a person do if they can't stop going into panic mode all day? And one thing suggested was to go exercise hard. And lo and behold, it worked. I couldn't believe the doctor never mentioned this to me, but I figured it out for myself. Now, what does exercising hard mean? It can be different depending on what you're used to doing, but you want to get your heart rate up for at least 20 minutes. If you're able to run, that's really good. If that's more than you can do, you can walk for 20 minutes. If you can walk briskly, all the better. If you can walk for an hour, that's a good thing too. When you're in the middle of a life crisis, give yourself a good bit of exercise. Walk till it tires you out. If you're not able to walk, do what you can to get your body moving and your heart rate just gently up for a while. And if you can do that in nature even, that's better. I'm sure you have had experience with how good that feels. So that's why number 5 is to do your exercise or do anything at all outside. Go outside. Outside is where the sun is on you, and even if it's cold or wet weather or gray, Your brain likes to know what's going on outside. What day is it? What season is it? You're like a little cat in the window. Hey, what's going on? This is part of neurological regulation. And so being outside helps you get regulated and calibrated and feel normal in your body, which helps you sleep normally and feel hungry at the right time. And normal sleep and normal eating aren't always easy for traumatized or depressed people or people who have gone through a big shock. But this can help nudge you in the right direction. And of course, the daylight is powerful medicine to move that depression away, to cue your brain. It's time to feel better. It's time to come out of it, and to talk to your nervous system and coax it into normal rhythms. Now, also, if you're going to walk or run, it can be nice to do it instead of on a treadmill, to do it on a natural surface like up and down on the curb or on the sidewalk or on a dirt road where there's a little bit of unevenness, because your brain likes that. It likes that little bit of a challenge. It likes to sense the changes on the surface and balance you and feel like it's a little bit slippery here, so you slow down, and here it's downhill. And those little changes in your perception of space, they feel good to your nervous system. So much of what's going on with complex PTSD, especially when you're struggling with your mood or feeling physically deadened, is that there's dysregulation going on in your brain and nervous system and emotions, and it makes everything harder and clunkier and duller. So people who were traumatized as kids are extra prone to dysregulation. Luckily, we all instinctively know how to re-regulate. It's not always easy when you're feeling stressed and sad, but the techniques I'm teaching you will help you get re-regulated faster and stay regulated more of the time. Number 6 is to do your movement in a group if you can. Movement together with other people. Other people, I know they're so triggering, right? But hanging out with them can be very therapeutic, even if you're not talking to them. When you're following verbal instructions like you do in a kickboxing class or ballroom dancing or yoga, where the instructor is calling out, okay, now put your right foot over here, left kick, or twirl to the right, and everybody twirls to the right. They don't know why exactly yet, but it amplifies the beneficial effect of the movement that you're doing it together with other people. And hearing and responding with your body to the verbal instructions left and right also accelerates your recalibration and the re-regulation of your brain. And it brings you out of that PTSD fog. And there's a center line in your body. And so one of the things you can also do is use exercises that cross that line. So instead of just, put my right hand out, I put my right hand on my left shoulder, and there's like just a little boost of amplification to the re-regulating effect of that movement. It's helpful. So number 7 is to eat some protein with every meal. Overeating, and particularly sugar and high carb processed food, is very strongly correlated with complex PTSD. Part of it is we just need to grab something easy, but part of it is also there's an emotionally numbing effect from carbing up like that. A lot of breakfast foods like toast and donuts and cereal are just pure fast carbs, and they will take your energy and they'll whoosh them up and then they'll crash them down. And anything that's making your hormones, and hormones are what govern your digestion and your hunger and your sense that it's time to eat. So anything that's making your endocrine system, your hormones spike up and then crash down, then that tends to be a little triggering for PTSD symptoms as well. So a little bit of advice is to make sure that you're eating protein with your meals, even if you're eating carby foods too. Just get some in there. If you were going to have toast, have an egg on toast, or have some, chia pudding and toast. If sweets and carby foods tend to trigger overeating in you, you might want to check out the food plan I follow, which is very flexible, whether you're vegan or a carnivore, whatever you are. It's a way of eating that helps minimize the spikes in insulin and helps restore your leptin levels, which is the hormone that responds to insulin. That program, they have a food quiz, a food susceptibility quiz. It's called Bright Line Eating. The link to the food quiz is down in the description section below, very near the bottom. You can take that quiz and find out if you have a very common trauma symptom where you're highly susceptible to kind of addictive eating of high carb foods. It would explain a lot, right? So if you've had some trauma in the past and you're like me, you're vulnerable to feeling overwhelmed. Eating too many fast carbohydrates can make you feel numb and scattered, and make you feel worse because it's hard to get anything done, which of course leads to more overwhelm later. So this is number 8, to get out of overwhelm and work deliberately on good, useful activities for yourself and for the people around you. It can be good to make a list. So for me, every morning after I meditate, I make a list of the most important things that I'd like to get done that day. And I know that there's a lot of stuff on my list that I'm probably not going to get to, and I'm okay with that. But I therefore zero in on the top 3, the 3 most important things for me to get done that day. And even then, I can't always do the 3 things. So I zero in on the top 1 thing, and I take them in order, and I make sure that the most important thing on my list gets done first. I make that the top priority. Now, sometimes when I'm choosing what's going to be the top priority, I'll choose the one that's the hardest, so I can eliminate the sense of dread that comes with having a hard thing ahead of me during the day. Number 9, this one's kind of special, but if you just want to get your spirits up, fight the urge to talk about anything negative. We've been conditioned that if we're feeling bad about something, we should talk to as many people as possible, talk more about it, especially if you're a woman. Have you noticed this? When people say, hey, how you doing? It's really easy to give the whole terrible story like, well, oh gosh, this thing is going on and it's so hard, and you know all the stuff going on in the world, and I've got a headache, and my neighbor lost her job, and you won't even believe the blah, 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 blah. So if you want to change your mood, I just encourage you to experiment with not talking about it. Don't talk about the thing that's bothering you. Keep your focus on where you're trying to go on the stuff that's positive for you. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying to never talk about what's bothering you. Sometimes, obviously, it's purposeful and important to talk to somebody about things that are bothering you. So I'm not saying go into denial or pretend nothing is bad. Just try experimenting with not talking about the thing that's bothering you, and you'll be surprised how easy it is to have your mood start going in a completely new direction. You're not constantly reminding yourself how upset you are about something, right? So this is also good when you're trying to get over someone after a breakup. Stop talking about that person. Not only don't call them, don't look at their social media, just stop talking about them, good or bad. All right? Number 10, and there's a question to ask yourself. What am I avoiding? A lot of times a depressed mood is really just a sense of dread about something you're avoiding. And it could be something like you're avoiding something that you need to learn for work, right? Or you're avoiding getting in touch with someone who you know you owe a phone call. Or you're not taking care of a problem that needs your attention, like you have a kid who is falling behind in school and you haven't dealt with it. It brings you down. You might be avoiding a task that you need to do and it's bothering you. And I'm sure you've noticed that it can ruin all your free time, worrying about it or procrastinating on it while you think about doing it, but you don't do it. So you can write, what am I avoiding? Make a list and see if you can find the next right action for you to take there to give yourself that good feeling of accomplishment, knowing that you're taking care of your life, you have integrity. And finally, this is my favorite part. If you really want to have a good day, find something kind that you can do for somebody where they won't find out who did it for them. If they find out, you don't get to check it off for that day, having done your good deed. It's a secret that you have. The reason I say do this secretly is because if there's any chance that you're going to get credit or be thought of as this really nice person, it can sometimes dilute the beneficial effect, the deep benefits of doing a kindness for someone. You're doing this for your own happiness, and if it helps someone else, that's really good. If you can call somebody who you know is having a hard time, make that phone call. You can put your neighbor's empty trash cans back in their driveway after pickup. You can go put a few quarters in somebody's parking meter when you see it's expired. If you can't afford to pay for other people's parking, you can give someone a kind word, and this is the best one. You can just say, you know what, you're doing a great job, or you can compliment them and say, the way that you just explained that to somebody was so clear. You have a knack for that. Be real with them. Don't make stuff up. If it's appropriate to put a hand on their shoulder, it isn't always, but if it is, that can make the kindness of your words feel even stronger and more impactful. The point is to pay attention to what other people have done that is deserving of a compliment and just give that to them. People need it far more than you realize. When you do that, you become an agent of good, which is really what you're made for. Life feels good when you remember this, and you remember it by acting like it, even when the motivation isn't really there at first. You don't wait to be motivated. You can just go through the motions and the benefit comes to you. Even when you're sad, the good things that you do could have a big impact on someone else who is suffering, and that counts too. When you witness their spirits come up, your spirits can't help but brighten up too.